Oh, look at that shiny goodness. Isn't she beautiful? So I'm going to do a different video, each one focused on a different side that features in the Premier League in '94 Merlin sticker book. And I'm going to go through alphabetically, so that means we're starting with the Arsenal. And we already have a manager in place, gorgeous George Graham. But I think I'm going to come back to him because he's got his own story to tell. So the first player up is David Seaman, kind of quintessential 90s goalkeeper. He signed for Arsenal in 1990, I think, and was with them for the whole of the decade and into the early 2000s. This is the time where he had his glorious moustache, but this is pre-ponytail. What I love about this kind of era of Arsenal kits, I love those old school Adidas kits, those goalkeeper jerseys with the 3 bars coming up from beneath, kind of meeting to enhance that JVC logo. And I love the home kit as well. I think it was the same kit that Norway had as well. Do you remember Sabutio back in the day, where you bought a team and it named on the front which teams that kit represented? And I think mine used to say Arsenal / Norway because they had the identical kit at that time. I mean, obviously, Seaman's one of the most high-profile players for Arsenal in the 90s, so we kind of know where he ended up, really. The thing I remember him most about after he retired was being on the ice skating show. I can't remember what it's called. I think Strictly Come Dancing or Dancing with the Stars, but on ice. He's one of England's most capped goalkeepers. I think he's 3rd on the list behind Peter Shilton and Jordan Pickford. And I think he finished his career after Arsenal with Man City. But he had some great moments. He had some amazing saves, a few gaffes as well here and there. Let's not mention Naeem from the halfway line. Okay, on to Lee Dixon, the right back in that back four for all those years. I think he was a Man City fan growing up. I think his dad was a goalkeeper for Man City. He's a Manchester boy, so he grew up watching the Blues, and he started his career up that way as well, playing for Chester and Bury and Stoke, before signing for Arsenal in the late 80s. He was a solid right back. You know, he wasn't flashy. I think that's to be said about a lot of the Arsenal defenders. They weren't flashy, but they knew their role and they executed it really well. Yeah, he never really looked like a footballer in my eye. He was surrounded by some party boys in this Arsenal team. I can never really imagine him fitting in with all that. I can always imagine him being quite sensible. I don't know, maybe he was living up in the hacienda during the 80s in Manchester. I think you can generally see him now working as a pundit. You hear him on the TV. He gets a lot of stick as a pundit, I think, but I always think he's quite good. And it says here in retirement, he's actually concentrated several of his businesses in restaurants, because apparently he's best friends with Heston Blumenthal, the world famous Michelin star chef. So maybe he spends his days hanging out down in the Fat Duck, eating it large with Heston. He stayed with Arsenal for the rest of his career, retiring in the early 2000s, playing over 450 league games, 22 England caps as well. But yeah, solid guy, solid professional, was a mainstay in that fantastic Arsenal defence of the 90s. Over on the other side, we've got Nigel Winterburn. Again, kind of has that Lee Dixon vibe, doesn't really feel like a footballer. He's got a kind of bank manager vibe. I think he signed for Arsenal from Wimbledon. So yeah, same as Lee Dixon really. He joined in the late 80s and stayed with Arsenal all through the 90s. I think he left at the turn of the millennium and joined West Ham. And I think he went into coaching later on in the decade and joined the backroom staff at Blackburn. Yeah, top player for Arsenal, but not as high profile as some of the other players we're coming on to in a minute. So the first centre-back now is Andy Linnigan, and there's only 3 centre-backs who get their own sticker in this sticker book. And I think that's quite a surprising choice, because the one that really misses out, and is probably a bit confusing really, is Steve Bold. Integral part of that Arsenal defence. So I'm not quite sure why Steve Bold never got his own sticker in this edition, at least. Maybe it was because the season previous to this one, Andy Linnigan scored that famous winner in the cup final for the Arsenal against Sheffield Wednesday, so maybe that bumped him up. And I think actually this sticker book was released where the season had actually already started. I think there'd been at least a good few games played, but they lost 3-0 on the opening day against Coventry with a hat-trick by Mickey Quinn. So I'm not sure who was playing in centre-back that day, but whoever it was had a bad day. So yeah, Andy Linnigan scored one of the winners in the cup finals the previous season. Obviously Arsenal did the cup double. I think the first think the first English side to win the domestic cup double, beating Sheffield Wednesday in both finals. So that obviously gave Andy Linighan the nod in the Merlin 94 sticker book. And I love this. After his playing days came to an end, Linighan became the owner of a plumbing company, and was still in the era here. Even though football was quite high profile, was still in that era where players couldn't necessarily just permanently retire after a playing career came to an end. This generation of players is probably the last who had to go out and work afterwards as well. They couldn't rely on the money they garnered throughout their playing career. You know, how that was to change in literally a few years down the line. But after leaving Arsenal, he stayed in London, went to Crystal Palace for 3-4 seasons and played over 100 league games for them as well. But obviously was a backup to the main defence at the heart of Arsenal's success in the 90s. And then we come to Tony Adams, Mr. Arsenal himself, one of my heroes growing up, Arsenal's captain of course, and played over 500 league games for them from 1983 into the early 2000s. He was one club man, never played for another team, undoubtedly one of the best defenders of the 90s in the Premier League. Has got to go down as one of the best captains in English football history as well. You can see why players would love to play for Tony Adams. I used to, when I used to watch Adams play for Arsenal, you could really see him marshalling that back line. He just had it down to a T. Obviously outside the game he's done a lot as well. He founded Sporting Chance Clinic, which helps counsel and support sportsmen and women suffering from drink, drug and gambling addictions. He's a big advocate for mental health and things like that. And previously has written some really critically acclaimed books about his kind of drinking and addiction, which kind of marred part of his earlier career. But for me, he's just an Arsenal great. Any Arsenal all-time 11 will always feature Tony Adams for the rest of time. It doesn't matter what's going to happen in the future years, he's always going to be there because he just encapsulated that spirit, that fight, but also that kind of class, but with a wild edge. And then wrapping up the centre-backs for Arsenal was Martin Keown, who was kind of in and out of the side around this time. I think Baldy probably was playing a bit more, but Martin Keown was starting to kind of cement his place in the team. This was his second stint with Arsenal, of course. He played for them in the mid-80s before going to Aston Villa, which I always kind of forget he went to Aston Villa. He played a lot of games for them and then went to Everton before rejoining Arsenal just probably the year before 94 and stuck with them until practically the mid-noughties. So he was with them for just over 10 years and became like a mainstay in that defence for so many years. Again, like Tony Adams, he had such a forceful personality, funny man really. Again, he hasn't got the kind of natural vibe of what you picture of as a footballer, but he was so determined, so aggressive. And you miss that kind of spirit sometimes in the modern game. I really loved his passion and his fight. He was a bit unpredictable sometimes, and obviously he let it get the better of him on occasion, most famously against Man United, of course. After the Arsenal, he went on to play for Leicester and Reading briefly, but not for very long. He was retired from football really about a year or so after leaving Arsenal. And since then, he's quite quiet in his personal life, but we generally see him these days on TalkSport arguing the toss with Simon Jordan, which some people find entertaining. Okay, so into midfield, we've got Paul Davis, who's coming to the end of his Arsenal career around this time. Been with Arsenal since as a schoolboy. He came through in 1980 and played over nearly 450 league games for Arsenal. So he was a big part of Arsenal's success in the 80s and early 90s. He was playing for Arsenal still when Liam Brady was kicking around. He left Arsenal in 1995, not long after this came out, and did briefly play abroad on loan for a little while, but then Brentford for a few games before retiring in 1996. And then he returned to Arsenal to become a youth coach in the mid-90s, but left the club about 8 years later after being overlooked for promotion that he felt was related to his skin colour, which is a shame. I hope that's not true. He was then invited to become an assistant manager of Kettering Town by the then manager Paul Gascoigne. So since 2016, he's been part of the FA, and in the early 2020s, he was confirmed as an assistant coach for the England under-17s. He's also an ambassador for Kick It Out and show racism the red card, which is really important as well. Okay, so next is Eddie McGoldrick, who signed for Arsenal in this season. He signed him from Crystal Palace, where he made over 140 league appearances. He never really came on at Arsenal. I think he was with their Gunners for about 3-4 seasons, I think. After leaving the Gunners, he went on and played for Man City for a few seasons, but again, never really established himself there either. And these days, he's back at Crystal Palace, where he's with the club's academy and manages the club's academy, in fact. So again, then Crystal Palace, another team which brings through great talent. So he's part of that really good setup there. Okay, so from Eddie McGoldrick, we've now got John Jensen. I think his nickname was Faxi. Isn't that a Danish beer? John Jensen, of course, scored that famous goal for Denmark in the final of Euro 92 against Germany, when Denmark went on to an unlikely victory in the Euros. So yeah, we signed him from Brøndby and became famous really for the wrong reasons at Arsenal, because it took him so long to break his duck to get his first ever goal. And eventually it came against QPR. It was actually a pretty good goal, to be fair, but it took a long time, and he never really lived up to any kind of promise that people might have had of Jensen. In the early 95, George Graham was sacked from the club after it found out that he had accepted an illegal bung payment from Norwegian agent Rune Haug following Arsenal's recruiting of Paul Lydersen and John Jensen, two of Haug's clients. So that was kind of an unceremonious end for George Graham, who of course was a legend for the club, both as a player and a manager. I'm not really sure how Arsenal fans view George Graham now, because as a player he left Arsenal, joined Man United, got sacked as manager, but then left under this big cloud, and then ended up ultimately managing Spurs. So anyway, John Jensen left Arsenal in 1996 and rejoined Brøndby, but yeah, he never hit the heights for Arsenal. So next we've got David Hillier, who was a product of the Arsenal Academy, came through in the late 80s, but yeah, he never really established himself in the team. After Arsenal, he played for Portsmouth and mainly for Bristol Rovers, before briefly having a spell at Barnet and then retiring. But he must have stuck around in the Bristol area later on in his life, because he went on to become a fireman in the Bristol area. But another kind of product of the Arsenal youth setup in the 80s was, of course, Ray Parlour, the Romford Pele, who was probably one of the most successful products of the youth system. I think he's a bit of an unsung hero, actually. He's actually one of my favourite players from the 90s. I read his book again recently, which is always entertaining. And again, he had a really strong friendship and connection with Tony Adams. I think he's always underrated. I think because he had that kind of self-deprecating style, I think people kind of forgot sometimes that he was actually a really good player. It's only Ray Parlour kind of encapsulated that. He did leave Arsenal in the mid-noughties. I actually think he left a bit prematurely, but I think he might have been struggling with injuries by that point. And I think he just wanted to play as much football as he could with the time he had left. So he went to Middlesbrough and then Hull before retiring. You do see him now and again, in the media on TalkSport and things like that, and he's always got a funny story to tell. Okay, then we've got the star man, Ian Wright, joined Arsenal in 91, signed from Crystal Palace, of course. The amount of players in this team who are just really strong characters, that really defines this Arsenal period. And towards the 90s, he left Arsenal, which was a sad day, and went and played for West Ham for a bit, and went on loan to Nottingham Forest and played for Scotland as well, for Celtic, and then finished his career at Burnley. And since his playing days, he's been ever present, really. He was at Match of the Day for years, and now we see him on the Overlap and programmes like that. But again, big character, big advocate for the game, big advocate for women's football as well, and raising the profile of that. And of course, his sons as well, also footballers. His adopted son, Sean White-Phillips, was a really good player, and his son, Bradley White-Phillips, also played as well, most notably in America for the New York Red Bulls. One of my favourites growing up, Ian Wright. I think he was one of those players where even if you didn't support Arsenal, you still supported Ian Wright. He's a bit of a national treasure. I think he's reaching that kind of status. And then another favourite of mine, Paul Merson, who was, really electric on the wing for Arsenal, played up front as well in the early 90s. probably until Ian Wright joined and he kind of went more on the wing. But yeah, it's just such an electric player. I think, criminally underrated during his time as well, really. I didn't get the plaudits, I don't think, as much as he should have done. Only had just over 20 caps for England. I think he could easily have had more, particularly around that time, early 90s, because England were struggling around then as well. I think they could have done with playing him more, really. Yeah, again, came through the Arsenal kind of youth ranks in the early 80s and started playing for the team in the mid-80s and played up for Arsenal until 97. So he was with the club for an age. And I actually think he could have played even longer because, after leaving the club, he played for Borough, Aston Villa, Portsmouth, and he's been really successful off the pitch as well. He was, famously part of the Gillette Soccer Saturday with Jeff Stelling and Charlie Nicholas and Phil Thompson and Letizia, and is still on there now. I think he was actually a Chelsea fan growing up, still is, I guess. And, quite a few of this Arsenal team of the era had his issues as well off the pitch. Well documented addiction issues, which, thankfully he's overcome these days. And then contrasting with Paul Merson quite heavily was Alan Smith, who was with Arsenal for years as well, from the kind of 87 until 95. He always struck me as being quite intelligent. And I think for a lot of people away from the game would know Alan Smith more by his voice, as he was the co-commentator for the FIFA games with Martin Tyler. He does have a really good voice. You can still hear him on commentary now. But I think his biggest moment for Arsenal was probably scoring that winning goal against Parma in the Cup Winners' Cup final. Also, how good was that Parma side of the 90s? But yeah, it was probably a bit of a throwback, Alan Smith, just that kind of big man up top, back to goal. He was quite a classy guy. Again, captured that spirit of Arsenal at the time, the Marble Hall, the history, the heritage of the club. So yeah, I always really liked Smudger. I think he was a good player for the club. And then the final player with their sticker was Kevin Campbell, who was a fantastic striker. Again, criminally underrated. It's amazing how many players I say that about when I'm doing these videos. But I think Kevin Campbell, again, was criminally underrated. Another player to come through the youth system at Arsenal. And he played for the club for best part of a decade and scored a hatful of goals. And I was actually really sad to see him leave the Arsenal. I think he could have stuck around for longer because he did really good things away from the club as well. He played for Nottingham Forest. He went abroad and played in Turkey for Trabzonspor before returning back to England and did really well with Everton and West Brom. My memory of Kevin Campbell is seeing him score a really good hat-trick in this season, in fact, against Swindon Town at the county ground. Post-career, something I didn't realise, he actually ran a record label, and his first signing to the label was rapper Mark Morrison. Of course, chopped the tarts with Return of the Mac. But then he sadly tragically died way too prematurely in 2024. But I always remember Kevin Campbell as just being such a presence up front and a foil for players like Ian Wright as well. I thought he's brilliant. So that's Arsenal in the Merlin Premier League 94 sticker book. Give this video a like and drop me a comment with any of your favourite players or memories from this period of Arsenal's great history. I'll be back with another video at some point. I think the next club up is of course Aston Villa. So this series is probably going to take a while to get through. There's obviously a lot of clubs to do, but I'll be doing it in between other videos as well. So please subscribe and support the channel and let me know what you think.